Story 1. So, I joined my school in the UK about halfway through the 6 years. About that same time, a kid, we'll call him Harold, joined, and of course, because we were both new, I was seated with him. Harold seemed nice, we got on. As the week progressed, however, 7-year-old Smaam noticed a less than pleasant smell coming from Harold. After a couple days of smell and complaining to my parents, they told me I should talk to my teacher. Talking to my teacher is exactly what I did. She seemed to understand, quietly telling me to take a seat next to Jenny at the back. Miss Teacher then proceeded to walk over to Harold and tell him that Smaam had to move because of the smell. Maybe he should have a bath when getting home. Never have I received such an unnerving death stare. After a couple of weeks, though, I'd forgotten about the ordeal, and it would seem Harold had too. We didn't sit with each other anymore, but would often be a part of the same group. Another couple of weeks passed. Harold and Smaam were playing British Bulldog in the playground with a bunch of other similar-aged peers. I was always proud of my footwork, easily avoiding the catchers while darting from one end of the playground to the other. After the end of lunch bell went, everyone began going back into school, myself and Harold ending up at the back of the group. What happened next left me stunned. I still struggle to understand it now. Harold proceeded to drag his face along the concrete fence. "F you, Smaam," he screamed as he ran towards the nearest teacher. The teacher took me straight to the principal's office, who told me that I was in serious trouble and that my parents had been called. My parents arrive and are taken into a side office, where they are told of what I'd done and what action the school intended to take. My parents believed me, but told me they would talk to the principal the next day after things had cooled down. That same evening, just before I was sent to bed, we revived a phone call from Harold's parents. Harold had been caught mouthing off about how he got a student expelled from school. The next day, Harold wasn't there, and I was the class hero. F you, Harold. Story 2. I had a 4th grade teacher that hated me. One day, the class was taking a test, and I finished early. Most of the class was still working, and I was bored, so I started playing with my pencils. Not making any noise, just messing with the erasers and stuff. All of a sudden, I look up, and she's standing over my desk, telling me off for distracting the other students who were still testing. She kept telling me that just because I was smart, only GT kid in a regular class, that didn't make me better than anyone else, and I was still subject to the same discipline. More scolding, then she took away my pencils and went back to her desk. Considering I was like 8, getting chewed out by the teacher was a really big deal, and I was pretty much on the verge of tears. So I'm sitting at my desk, upset and waiting for everyone to finish. I end up spacing out and staring at the wall for a bit, and next thing I know, she's back at my desk screaming at me to go out into the hall. So she comes out into the hall a couple minutes later and chews me out again for being disruptive, not even telling me what I did. Next thing I know, she hands me a pink referral slip to give to my parents. The kind that goes on your permanent school record, aka freakout material. I go through the rest of the day freaking out because I know my mom is going to beat my ass. I get home and give it to my mom, crying, and tell her I'm sorry and I won't ever do it again. She reads through it and quiets me down, asking me what happened. I explain everything to her, and she just sort of nods. Turns out my teacher had written me up for playing with my pencils and twirling my hair. That's it. My mom ended up going to the school and talking with the principal about all the problems I'd been having with this particular teacher. Apparently, she'd been complaining about me all year, even though all my other teachers really liked me. The referral ended up getting waived and she was put on probation, and later fired for targeting students. Story 3. I was a good kid, right? Always a people pleaser, never got in trouble. When I was in the 5th grade, I submitted a spelling homework assignment. This assignment in particular was to use the words in a sentence. At the time, we were also on our poetry unit. If we incorporated alliteration in our sentences, we got extra credit. The word, defrosted. My sentence, Dolly defrosted Daddy's duck. You know, Dolly had duck meat in the freezer. I had never even eaten duck as a kid. I had a very strict diet of grilled cheese and Lunchables. So I turn in the assignment in the morning and go about my day. After lunch, my teacher called me out of the classroom. Oh, crap. Seriously, I never get in trouble, so being called out into the hallway sent my anxiety through the elementary school roof. She looked pissed and was holding my homework. Read this sentence now, she glares. I feel my face burning red. Confused, I read the sentence out loud. Dolly defrosted Daddy's duck. Read it again. Dolly defrosted Daddy's duck. She points to the end of the sentence. Read that word, duck. Her face softens a bit and tells me to return to the classroom. I'm so confused at this point, it's ridiculous. Later that day, following a very lengthy conversation with my parents, I learned two things. I have terrible handwriting, and the meaning of the word TLDR, Dolly defrosted Daddy's. Story 4. Oh yeah, I also remember this one quite vividly. I was like the head teacher's favorite pupil in reception, kindergarten equivalent in the UK. I had a cute smile and was the youngest in the year. Even though they aren't supposed to have favorites, I was hers. The main reason I mention this is because I think I was always really sweet and cute on their faces, but was kind of a little away from the teachers, and this meant that I thought I could get away with a lot. Well, like all kids my age, I had a nemesis, Jack. This little was the bane of my existence, and we hated each other's guts. One day, I decided I'd had enough of his shit. He pushed me too far. This little cunt was gonna get it right after nap time. So I have my nap, I bide my time like a little psycho, and wait until outdoor playtime. Nap time comes and goes. We head out and start playing. I can't find him, but I know I will. Then I see him, that f***ing bastard, playing football like he's some sort of innocent little angel. But I knew better. I picked up a little pebble and lobbed it with as much power as I could muster. I was aiming for his eyes, but didn't think I'd actually hit him. I was on the other side of the playground and still hit the little square in the right eye. I would have gotten away with it as well, but that looping shot was so beautiful and insanely unlikely that I had to celebrate. I celebrated like I scored the winning goal for the Gunners in the Champions League final. Well, those celebrations were cut short by me getting dragged away by the teacher on duty, and I received a whooping from my parents later when they found out. Oh well, that mother left me alone after that, so it was worth it. Story 5. Nobody's probably going to read this because I'm late, but whatever, here goes. In elementary school, I was one of the few privileged kids, around 6 to 7 years old, who owned a computer. Back then, people didn't have computers at home in my country, or at least they were pretty rare. I'm talking about Windows 3.11 for workgroups. Anyhow, our elementary school was chosen to host a computer lab with multiple machines and other stuff, and it was a real privilege for us. Our teachers had no idea how to operate computers, so they went to courses. But surprise, surprise, I knew more than them about how to operate a Windows machine. I'm talking about very basic stuff, like how to copy-paste files, how to open Words or Paint or whatever. This is not to oversell my abilities or anything. I didn't know jack shit, but still, I knew more than them. They would often come looking for me during class hours and ask if I could go with them to the computer lab to help them copy a file or whatever. Anyhow, I'm rambling. Once, we were in a computer lab class with our teacher, and she was trying to show us a little educational video game. We were all sitting on the floor in a circle around her, and she was operating the machine. It was a Pac-Man-like game with dinosaurs trying to eat you as a caveman. Why the hell was a caveman with dinosaurs in an educational game? Don't ask me. You had a labyrinth to navigate and escape, but our teacher didn't know how to move the little player. She tried all the keys and nothing worked. I noticed that my cursor turned into an arrow when she moved the mouse, so my 7-year-old gamer brain realized that you'd move around by clicking or dragging the mouse, not the keyboard. I tried to tell her about it, but she just told me to shut up and sit back down. I tried to tell her that she could use the mouse, but then she flipped and just told me to go stand in the hall for the rest of the class because I obviously didn't want to participate in the computer lab. So there I went. I walked out and stood in the corridor for 2 whole hours, thinking about how I wanted to go home and play video games with my own, family's, computer. After the class was over, my friends then told me that she wasted more than 20 minutes trying to operate that game, and then gave up and moved on to another game. A few days later, I went to another teacher and asked if I could get a pirated copy of that game for my own pleasure at home, and yep, you had to use the mouse to move. Stupid bitch. I was right. Story 6. making a mess by rubbing my eraser on the carpet and leaving it, figuring someone would clean it up. It left an obvious mark. Teacher threatened to look through all of our stuff until he found the owner. He was an old grump who would have done it too, and done it slowly and meticulously, as you watched your fate slowly approach and you confessed before the big, angry, scary man found everything and got you. I cried in front of him and his whole class. Few years later, when I was a student in his class, among the eldest students of the school, it turned out to be the sort of thing that happened. When someone was out of line, he'd chew them out in front of his entire class, frequently leading to tears. He had a real reputation for doing it too. He would praise students in front of his whole class too, but when a messenger showed up saying that so-and-so has to go to the principal, it was pretty terrifying. Mr. J from Hangatiki Primary School, New Zealand. Amazing man. Story 7. When I was at school, they decided to build a nursery in the back tarmacked area of the playground, which all the kids were up in arms about. It would take away our dry area for football. What I mean by this is we had a large area of grassland right beside the tarmacked area with a high wall that would stop balls going near the school windows. We'd play on the tarmac when it was too wet, and we didn't want to damage the pitch. Well, what they did was build the nursery, destroy our system, and tarmac the grass area. Now we can't play properly. Not goalkeepers diving saves, slide tackles, getting covered in mud as all kids do. What did I do to get in trouble? Before they tarmacked the grass pitch, I took a sit-on pedal cart, filled it with mud from the pitch, and completely covered the new nursery in thick mud, almost like a climbing wall. My plan was perfect, and they couldn't link it back to me. Except a couple of my friends were helping, and they decided to play with the cart a little longer after the deed was done, and after finishing they brought it back to my house, leaving a massive trail of filth all the way back to me. F***ing friends. Scumbags dropped me in it, and I had to clean the play park and the nursery. Story 8. One time after school I hit a guy's shoe. I was always picked up late, so I would sit with the volleyball team before they started practice. Well, some of the other guys passed me this kid's shoe and told me to hide it. So I put it behind a tree and told the guys where it was when they asked. But then I got picked up, and they started practice. So the next day I found out that the kid wasn't in school that day because he didn't have shoes. They didn't give him back his shoe afterwards either. I also found out it's a special orthopedic shoe, so he couldn't come in without it. The shoe was no longer in its hiding spot. But he didn't know who did it, so his parents called the school, after which a short witch hunt ensued, and it was obvious that some people were talking, followed by none of the other guys being able to play it cool after interrogation. So I found out pretty quick. Teachers knew everyone who was involved because the other guys were crowding around trying to find out news instead of playing innocent, and the dude's parents bought Jordans to replace his shoe, which was now my responsibility. Or should I say my parents, because I was a child with no income. So nobody was happy with me except for this kid, who was like, "That's okay, I got Jordans and missed a day of school." Story 9. Always late. Ah well, here goes. We were studying space and planets in about 5th grade, and I found out for the first time that Jupiter actually had rings around it, just not nearly as prominent as Saturn's. When I went to the bathroom, I saw one of my friends from a different class in the hall. I said, "Hey, did you know that Jupiter has rings?" Suddenly, his teacher flipped the f*** out on me and took me to see my teacher. I got a pink slip, which was basically a warning. My teacher said if I had told her what I had actually said to my friend, she would tear it up. If I didn't tell her by the end of recess, she would make it a white slip, after school detention. I pleaded with her. I told him that Jupiter had rings. Please, I'm telling the truth. Nothing would crack this woman and her cold-hearted demeanor. She stayed firm, and despite my truthful ways, she increased the pink slip to a white slip, and I had to call my mom and tell her. I told my mom while I was crying about what happened. She was not having it either. Everything was falling down around me. On the drive home, my mother told me that I would be grounded unless I told her what I actually said before we got home. "Did you know that Jupiter has rings?" I said. At this point, my voice was quivering because I knew that no matter how hard I truthed, lies were the only thing being seen. I was racking my brain for a smart-ass comment that I could claim I said, but I couldn't think of any. As we pulled into the garage, my mother asked me, "Do you want to know what you said?" "Yes," I replied, crying again. Jupiter has your ass, she screamed angrily. I didn't reply. I simply sat there thinking, shit, that's clever. The truth is, I really did tell my friend that Jupiter has rings, and I was amazed at that fact. TLDR, I was a dishonest as a kid, and my teacher and mom didn't believe me when I was telling the truth. Story 10. There was a playground structure at my elementary school that was everyone's favorite. We would all play rather rambunctiously on this thing. At the top, it had a sort of captain's nest with a pathway and railing behind it. One day, while in the second or third grade, and at the top of this in a press of kids, I got pushed up against the railing of this pathway behind the captain's nest. And in the press of about a dozen or so kids up there, I got stuck. It became hard to breathe, and I freaked out. In the process, trying to yell and get out of there, I started flailing about. I grabbed the arm of the kid who was shoved up against me, and without really thinking, bit down. Hard enough to draw blood. This kind of freaked out some of the other kids, and the press of craziness let up while I started sucking in air to breathe again. The kid who was bitten climbed down and ran off, and I sat down with my feet dangling through the slats of the railing. A short time later, the playground aide showed up. Now, this playground aide would always have an entourage of girls walking around her, who thought very highly of themselves because they would tattle on anyone who wasn't following the playground rules. They all walked up and the playground aide tugged on my shoe, telling me I needed to climb down and come with her. Under the high and mighty looking down the nose gaze of this flock, I followed along and was ushered to the principal's office. I'd never been in trouble before, so I was so scared that I forgot to blink. The principal grilled me about what I'd done and why I'd done it and how this was very serious and that my mom was going to be called and so on and so forth. I didn't find out until a decade later from my mom that the school staff were freaking out not because I'd bitten this kid and drawn blood, but because they were worried about AIDS. Now, this was the mid-'80s, and the understanding of HIV and AIDS was rather poor at the time. There was a lot of misinformation floating around. In this case, they were specifically worried that I might have given this kid AIDS, or somehow gotten it from him. My mom came and picked me up, and I was taken home. She wasn't worried, as I certainly didn't have HIV/AIDS. And neither did the other kid. I wasn't grounded, but I was given a talk about being more careful in the way that I react to things. Biting was not okay. The kid turned out fine, and I remember we remained friends until I moved away after 4th grade. Story 11. We were watching some kind of video in kindergarten, and the teacher told no one to talk, otherwise they would have to sit out and change their color card to red. While I was getting into the video, these two kids behind me started talking pretty loudly, and I couldn't hear, so I turned around and made a shh noise. The teacher came around the corner instantly and made me turn my card to red and sit out in the other part of the room. She said that it didn't matter if the kids behind me were talking, but apparently it's a huge problem if I try to get them to stop without actually forming words. There was another time when I was in 4th grade inside my school's chapel, and the classes were dismissed to return to their classrooms. Me, my friend, and this girl sitting nearby weren't paying attention and just continued talking without getting up to leave. All of a sudden, one of the teachers calls out to us and begins to chew me and my friend out in front of everybody. Then, when the girl walked by when we were getting scolded, the teacher didn't even say anything, let alone make any eye movement towards her. I asked her why we are getting in trouble and that girl isn't, but the teacher quickly spoke over me, telling me that doesn't matter. Teachers were much more lenient with girls at this school. I had math class after recess during my 4th grade year, and I would be out of breath, so I took deep breaths at the beginning of class. One day, my teacher looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You can keep on sighing until the cows come home." I felt offended because I wasn't sighing because I was bored, I was just taking a deep breath. Every time I take a deep breath, everyone thinks I'm just tired of some shit, but it's really their shit. Story 1. I remember once my brother and I were being forced to spend the day shopping with our grandparents and younger cousin. My grandmother could literally spend the whole day in one shop, so we had to amuse ourselves however we could as kids. My brother was a teen at the time and I was 6, with the younger cousin, who was a terror, being 3 or 4. My brother bought a bouncy ball and we basically ended up playing fetch with the younger cousin with it. After a whole day of this, we're in the changing rooms and my brother gets the bright idea to throw the ball into an occupied one, just thinking there was no way our cousin would still go after it. Well, he did. He just bounds through the curtain in the most determined pursuit of a bouncy ball I've ever seen. The woman inside screams. Everybody is horrified. My brother almost pees his pants laughing. Story 2. Was taking a at college, and I guess for some dumb fuck reason, an elementary teacher had kids come tour the building I was in. One after the other, a kid peeked under the stall to see me shitting. I felt like a criminal, and I was just... They didn't get a look at my junk, but sure enough, right after the first one yelled, "Ew!" another dumb kid peeks under. Like full-on dipshit kid peek. I felt like I was under assault. Then I heard the teacher call for them, and they left me in peace. So many kids crawled on the floor to see a grown man shit. Not surprised you've seen an eye glance. Story 3. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I was obsessed with Harry Potter. I watched every movie that was out at the time and even dressed up as Harry for Halloween. So one day, I was in a deli with my mom and a Muslim woman walked in wearing an abaya with a face covering as well. According to my mom, I got so scared and pointed at the ladder and yelled pretty loud, "Mommy, it's a Dementor!" To this day, my mom still says it's the most embarrassing experience she's had. Story 4. When I was about 7, my mom was friends with an Asian woman, probably in her early 40s, up the street that I had never met before. One day, she came to our house, and when I opened the door, I yelled to my mom, "Mom, a Chinese lady is here for you." Now I'm 18 and realize that loudly announcing who is at your home by their race or nationality doesn't sound all that great. Story 5. When I was in 5th grade, we made a calendar to take home. We each had our picture taken and glued to the cover, and were allowed to decorate it and each of the following months, however we chose. Being 10, nearly 11, there was so much that I didn't know about the world. What made it tick, and more importantly, its history. Prior to the creative masterpiece that was unfolding in class, at home I had walked in on my dad watching a World War II documentary where they showed footage of the German regalia and subsequently their flags. Not knowing any better, I thought the windmill symbol was really cool and decided it should be on the cover of this calendar. One in each corner with my photo smack dab in the middle. No one said anything to me about it. It went through the lamination machine and was sent home with me. I wish I could have seen my teacher's reaction when she thought one of her students had skinheads for parents. So it turns out that the calendar is not quite how I described it above. It's been 17 years, but my lovely, crazy, sentimental mom actually held on to it. Story 6. So in kindergarten, we had these climbing poles. 2 friends and I were like humping the climbing pole because it made a funny feeling. So 3 girls, 5 years old, humping the pole. We even showed it to our parents. Story 7. When I was 6 or so, a friend and I borrowed his dad's Polaroid camera, and we thought that it would be hilarious to take photos of our winners. He had them in his cupboard for a while, and sometimes we would take them out to laugh at, until someone put that kind of thing in context, and we quickly destroyed our accidental child stash and never spoke of it again. Story 8. Not me, but my sister used to lap her drinks up like a dog. Turns out she was calling this doggy style. One time they forgot to bring her a straw at the restaurant we were in, and she loudly screamed, "Guess I'll do it doggy style." I think she was 7 or 8 at the time. Story 9. I was maybe 5 or 6 and tried to hit an old lady with a plastic wiffle ball bat because she had no teeth, and that freaked the fuck out of me. Story 10. I used to call those pigeons with the pointy tuft on their heads horny birds. I would yell it out so loudly too. My mom told me she had to look away every time I did it because it made her laugh until she cried. Obviously, I wasn't told until later because I was only 5 at the time. Story 11. Lick the tits on statues. Nobody ever told me. Was falling asleep one day and it just dawned on me and I was horrified. Story 12. I apparently pointed at an overweight bald man whilst shopping with my dad and yelled, "Look, Daddy, it's Homer Simpson." I had a stuffed animal as a kid that was my favorite. It was a red bull, and I carried it everywhere I went. But it took me a while to give it a name. I thought, well, it has horns, so what would a good name be? I named my stuffed animal. Story 14. I used to play with this cup in the bath and drink water out of it for years. Did it in the shower too as I got older. It had a handle on the end of it and I never knew why. One day I witnessed my mother use this cup in the toilet, violently, and that was the moment I realized what a plunger was. You must have an immune system stronger than any living thing, or a completely shot one. It's a 50-50 really. Story 15. Not me, but my daughter. We live in a place where we don't see many people of different ethnicities. But one day, she saw a Muslim man with a beard dressed in the long white thing they wear, forgive my ignorance here, and she was convinced he was God. No idea why, but she wouldn't leave the dude alone. She was 4, and started reeling off a Christmas list. Turns out Santa and God were mixed up too. Thankfully, he found it funny. Imagine sending a letter with prayers to Santa and praying to God about your Christmas list. Story 16. One of my uncles is a twin, and he lived just up the road from us. For some context, this was in rural Arkansas, and my family definitely hits a lot of the markers for trailer trash. Nobody knows how this started. I'm guessing he probably saw us peeing in the yard and told us he was going to cut our things off, so we thought it was funny. But my little brother and I would run to the edge of the road and shake our goobers at him when he drove by. We did this from the ages of 5 until at least 10. One of the weird things of living in the country is you learn to identify vehicles based on their sound and direction, usually because they were just junkers with unique sounds. We'd be playing in the back pasture, hear his truck, then just dead sprint to the road to shake our goobers at Jerry. Story 17. I was holding my mom's hand on the right and an older male family friend's hand on the left and thought that holding their hands felt warm and good. So let's extend that feeling to them both and bring their hands together. Got scolded by my mom because she was so embarrassed. Also didn't understand then why my mom forbade me to sit and bounce on my dad's lap. Story 18. I was a serious nudist as a child. My parents could never keep me in my clothes. My older sister would have her friends over, who I had a crush on, and I'd run outside butt naked to see them. There's a story that I still get teased about to this day of when my neighbor called my mom at work to tell her I was riding my big wheel across one of the busiest roads in town, completely naked. Story 19. I would have been about 7, and we were doing a craft activity based on our recent math work, painting a round paper plate with a geometric pattern, with an extension task to try and make it symmetrical in some way. I, being a high achiever, went for rotational symmetry and took inspiration from one of my favorite history books from the class bookshelf. My teacher actually handled it really well. She called me back before break and asked me if I'd come up with it myself or had seen it somewhere before. I happily nodded and took her to the bookshelf, and her dawning realization, oh, is something I'll remember to this day. We ended up having a chat about the book, and she helped with some of my reading comprehension, before asking if I wanted to keep the plate I'd made or design a new one. Story 20. Called my mom had heard a kid at school say the word but didn't know what it meant. We were fighting with mom the same day at home, and she called me a runt, reminded me of a word that rhymed, and the rest is history. Was probably 5 or 6. Story 21. I have an aunt who has one fixed eye. Her right eye doesn't move. I think I was 4 or 5 back then. We were having a conversation, and I asked her flat out, "Can you tell me which way you're looking at? It's very confusing." Story 22. I grabbed my dad's girlfriend's and yelled honk honk many times. They both thought it was hilarious. Story 23. When I was younger, I was trying to ask an Asian man what his heritage was, but I didn't want to insult him by asking what country he was from because he might have been born and raised in a non-Asian country. I didn't know how to ask properly. My grandmother always called things made in Asia, and people from Asia Oriental. My 7-year-old self asked this poor Asian man what his orientation was. He told me he was gay. Story 24. I was looking through a magazine on a car ride with my parents, and there was a black bar censoring a woman's. So, being the curious child I was, I tried looking under the blackout as if it was some kind of pop-up book. My dad never let me live it down. Story 25. I knew this was inappropriate, but I couldn't control it. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I got up from bed and went to the trash bin, and I was basically spectating myself the whole time, and I had no control. Story 27. Johnny Bravo greeted every woman he met with, "Hey, mama," or something like that. That show was big when I was in kindergarten, ages 5 and 6, and I definitely said that to female classmates. Story 28. When I was a young kid, I used to walk up to anyone, irrelevant of age and gender, and ask them, "Do you have a willy?" "I have a willy." My dad still brings it up from time to time. Story 29. I opened the door. It was the "don't open this door except in case of an emergency" at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Many sirens went off. Many guards came running. Much loud crying ensued from me, and many tears hit the floor. I was 5. Story 30.
We went to an Easter egg hunt at my mom's friend's place who we hadn't seen in a long time. When I saw her friend, she said, "Oh my God, you got old." My mom was really embarrassed and laughed it off, but I can see the pain in her eyes thinking back on it. Story 31. When my younger sister was a young child, 3 years oldish, my mom taught her to refer to her private parts as her mini, which is a child-friendly term for it in the UK. One time, my mom went shopping with my sister in her pram, and the female checkout worker smiled at my sister. My sister then opened her legs wide and exclaimed, "I'm touching my before placing her hands over her tights in the area. My mom apologized before quickly paying and hoping a hole in the earth would swallow her up to escape the embarrassment. Story 32. I thought it was a massager. Sure, it had a weird shape, but I was just a kid. How was I supposed to know? I thought it was a massager, man. It is a massager, just for your downstairs area. Story 33. My parents used to keep mini bottles of liquor in the fridge, the ones you'd find in hotel minibars. We had to make our own lunches at times when mom and dad were busy with work, and my first grade decided to empty the bottles into the sink and put juice in them to bring to school. My parents got a call that day from school. Story 34. Answered the door for a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't remember it, but my mom loves to tell the story. Story 35. Had a friend who was a year older than me. One day he wanted me to suck his toes, so I did. It was gross, and I never did it again. We were maybe 8 to 9. He was my only friend at the time, and I really didn't want to lose him. He just kept on asking, so I did it after a while. I found way better friends shortly after. Story 36. When I was 5, I wrote a story all about how me and my mom went shopping, and she bought me a new sweatshirt. I didn't know why my teacher was laughing. I distinctly remember thinking, what's so funny about my sweatshirt? Story 37. When I was about 3 years old, I would constantly ask elderly people when they would die. In my mind, I just wanted to make sure that if I ever had something important to tell them, I'd do it by then. Never got a straight answer, though. Story 38. When I was being breastfed, I was just learning my first language, which was Spanish. My mom said I picked it up pretty quickly, and when we would go to the supermarket in the summer and I saw women with lower-cut shirts, I would scream, "Mami, tetas," which is Spanish for mom. She was mortified every time. Story 39. I invented my own funny word by combining part of the word prat and part of the word twit. It was fun to say at high volumes. Couldn't understand why my parents would get cross with me when I'd wander around shouting at the top of my voice. Story 40. When I was younger, I hung out with this kid for a while who I later realized was a bad influence. But he had taught me some of the more mature topics in life, like the N-word, and told me about certain things, etc. One of those words that he taught me about is SA. He explained it so, it's when you up a girl and, you know, but I didn't know. Or at least I didn't know he was forcibly having. So then, some girl behind us on the school bus was annoying us, and I was like, "Shut up, or we're gonna SAY you." As you would expect, a horrified expression came over her face, and she was like, "Oh my God, WTF?" And then further explained the concept in more detail, and I was mortified. So basically, I said it because I thought it was just another way to say beat up. It's definitely a late-at-night kind of thought. Story 41. My brothers were playing table football while we were waiting for the church sermon before us to get out, and I think they complained about the goals not being big enough. And in my 6 is probably that age-year-old mind, the goal you made of your fingers was too small, and if you made one with your arms, your head would be in the way. So the only rational option was to roll over and put my legs up. While in a church dress, mind you, to make the Y shape. All my siblings immediately told me to roll back over and told me not to do that. I think I pouted after, cause I was just trying to help. Story 42. I don't really know if it's inappropriate in the not safe for work way, but I used to eat dishwasher tablets whenever my grandma got them out of the cupboard. I did it about 3 times until she started locking me out of the kitchen when she wanted to load the dishwasher. Story 43. My mom told me a funny story of when I was 3. My mom and dad bought a toy for them. They bought a boxer for my dad that was shaped like an elephant. Yes, the goes there. Mostly for the silly aspect of it. It seems that 3-year-old me found the elephant boxer and used it as a hat. I was running around the house just screaming, "Grandma, I'm an elephant! Mom, look, I'm an elephant!" Story 44. There's a song where I come from. Its lyrics roughly translate to, I stepped in a puddle, my new shoes got muddy. No matter how hard I brushed it, my woman left me. But the lyrics have a double meaning. because the word for brush also means to. So I guess sweet 4-ish-year-old me wasn't so cute at my uncle's wedding, singing this song to everyone. Story 45. Not me, but my little sister. My father's boss comes over for dinner, and my father introduces him to us. My sister was barely 5, and she exclaimed, "But he's black." To make this situation even worse, we are a white family in South Africa, and this incident took place not even a decade after apartheid came to an end. Story 46. I heard a funny-sounding word in the 7th grade, went to school one day, and started saying it over and over again. All of a sudden, my teacher snaps and yells at me, "Stop saying that." I asked why. He told me it's a really bad word. Years later, I learned it's an incredibly racist slur. I still cringe about it to this day. Story 47. When I was about 7, I essentially flashed my male neighbor because we were going to the beach and I had a brand new bikini on. It was just like a little sports bikini set, but I thought I was the dog's in it. So I lifted my top up from across the street to show him. Couldn't understand why he and my dad started laughing awkwardly with each other. Story 48. We went to a family friend's house and their dog kept jumping up on people and doing a funny dance. Everyone got mad at him and pushed him off, but I was out in the hallway and the dog jumped on me, so I just let him dance. I was so mad that he peed on my leg. Had to borrow sweatpants while my pants were in the wash the rest of the night. Story 49. Went grocery shopping with my mom and asked her if we can get some, but meant to say cumin. Everyone stared at her and she was just like, "What?" Was young and saw them talking about cumin on a TV show and wanted to try it. To be fair, isn't far off from cumin. Story 50. I said make love not war to my dad once, not realizing that make love meant. He stopped what he was doing and braced himself against the kitchen counter and just went, "I'm sorry, what? You cannot say that to your dad." I had a good chuckle.